Greg here with Outdoors on the Cheap, and today I'm going to do a video on all the things you can use a walking stick for. I did a video a number of years ago on why I carry a walking stick, but I didn't really go into the usefulness of a walking stick, just having a good solid stick around all the time. So I thought I'd just go further in depth on that. And I mean, this is a long list. There's like 30, maybe 40 things on this list. So let's get started. First off, a couple points on the length of the stick and design and types of wood and that sort of thing. You know, you see a lot of people on YouTube videos and stuff like that. They've got these perfectly crafted, you know, the special oak or hickory or whatever. For me, I don't think you should spend any more than 5 or 10 minutes on something like this, because you're probably going to lose it. And it's actually better off if it isn't precious to you, because it makes it more useful. There's things you can use a walking stick for that you would not use one for if it was, you know, lacquered and beautiful and, you know, all that sort of stuff. It's just anyone that does that makes a sort of special walking stick for actually going in the woods. I don't think they've really thought through the full usefulness of that tool. Height, I'd say armpit height. Or some people like it up to chin, some people like it as high as their head. Really depends. I've tried all those different lengths. I've even tried lower, like waist height, like a cane. I find that's too short. I find the armpit is the best height for me, because it's not too long. If it's armpit length, it's sort of great for bashing things and getting things out of the way. Once it gets longer than that, it becomes a little bit unwieldy. Length adds usefulness in other areas, but I think you can get by. So for me, it's the armpit, but you can go higher with that. If you know, you can try all that out, spend 20, 30 years playing around with different heights. If you're anything like me, you'll actually wind up at the armpit. But anyway, I also think a walking stick should be reasonably light, but strong for its weight. Some people use, you know, oak and all these other sorts of things. I actually like spruce, any kind of spruce. It's strong enough, right? You can smash branches and do things with spruce. It's not invincible, but it's pretty strong. And once it dries out, it's very light. Every time you take a couple steps, you could pick it up and, you know, so you're like doing 1,000 little bicep curls. And if it's heavy, it fatigues your arm over time if you're walking all day. So it should be pretty light, okay? Number one, and these are things I alluded to in the first video, it's just handy to have something when you're walking in the woods where the terrain is uneven and there's rocks and all kinds of things like that, obstacles, logs and things like that that have fallen down. It helps to prevent you from falling down, right? So it prevents injury, mechanical injury. It helps when you're ascending a steep slope, and it's even more difficult. The more treacherous thing is descending a steep slope. If you've got a walking stick with you, you're just way less likely to fall down in that situation. Also, when you have to maybe negotiate a bit of terrain where there's a lot of rocks and you're kind of walking, it's actually easier to step from rock to rock as opposed to in between the rocks. Where I live here in Nova Scotia, Canada, if you're going through a rocky area, the spaces between the rocks tend to have holes, and they can be very deep holes, and there's a lot of injuries you can get. So you're actually better off walking from rock to rock, but that can be, you know, treacherous. That you can fall down doing that, so you get this third point of contact, a third leg. When you're doing that, it's way less, you know, way less risky. Also, if you're just going through a patch of woods where there's like a fallen tree, and it's just easier to go along the fallen tree as opposed to going around it, that sort of thing. You know, depending on how good your balance is. I mean, young kids love doing that sort of thing, but as you get on in age, this becomes a very risky proposition. But with a stick like this, it's really no big deal. It's amazing how stable you are in any situation like that. It's also used for when you're crossing a creek or a river where you can't see the bottom. A lot of the rivers and creeks where I live is not clear water. It's always like tea-colored. It's either muddy or tea-colored or that sort of thing. Even if it's only a couple feet deep, you usually can't see what you're walking in. So you can, just having that third point of contact as you're doing that, something over there, as you're doing that, can prevent you from falling down. You know, whether the falling down injures you or you get your foot, you know, stuck in some sort of hole, or you just don't want to get soaked, right? That's not good. Also, just if you're wading and fishing, right? I found in later years when I'm fly fishing and I got the waders on, I actually like to bring a walking stick with me. You know, I'll just stick it in the ground when I got to make casts and stuff like that, but I just find you're just way less likely to lose your balance and fall down if you've got the walking stick. So it's just great for moving around so you don't fall down, injure yourself, or get a soak or that sort of thing. Another great thing about a walking stick is that it can extend your reach. If you're trying to gather kindling around camp in the evening and there's some useful dry branches up higher in a tree, you can just smash them off, right? If they're a bit heavier than that, you can, if you've got a notch or a couple notches near the bottom of the stick, and you know your knots, I would use jam knot, that's what I use, but you can lash folding saw onto that walking stick, and then all of a sudden you can reach all kinds of things you couldn't reach otherwise. And actually, folding saw, a one-hand folding saw, once you lash it onto a stick, a heavy, you know, strong, stout stick, becomes a two-handed saw. You can use two hands, you can get your full body into it, and you can actually, if you've got a lot of wood to process, it's easier if you've got it attached to a stick like this, as long as it's nice and solid, right? Sometimes, when I've done it before, if you plane down the side where the knife's going to be attached, or the saw is going to be attached, it just hooks up better. Plane it down a couple notches, really tight notches, know your knots. But if you've got a lot of work to do with a saw, it's actually much less fatiguing because you're using not just two hands, but you're kind of getting, you know, your body into it like a bow saw. So it can greatly increase the efficiency of using a saw. The same thing goes for a knife. If for whatever reason you need extra reach with a knife, maybe you're, you know, clearing ferns out of the way or something like that, or perhaps you're fighting off a bear or whatever, you can lash a knife to one of these. There's situations where lashing a knife, it's usually clearing brush and that sort of thing. If you're, I mean, you don't hike around clearing brush all the time. But if you were setting up a camp for an evening and there was a brushy area you had to go through to access water or something like that, you're going to be going through it a lot. Maybe you want to clear a little path because the brush gets wet and that sort of thing, and it gets your pants soaked. You know, the situations where you want to clear brush, you can bend down and do that with a knife, but if you lash it onto a walking stick, your walking stick becomes like a scythe, okay? Another great thing for the walking stick is it gives you stability when you have to take some sort of awkward stance and hold it for any length of time. First thing that comes to mind is when you have to take a poop. I mean, usually, a lot of people just lean against a tree or they hang off a tree, but if there's nothing around like that, when you're squatting down, you can just hang onto the stick and it just keeps you from falling down when you're squatting to take a poop. So it's handy for that. I also find, and maybe this is because I'm in my 50s, I don't know, and I do a lot of balance exercises, but if I'm bathing, like this is September right now, at the end of the day, I like to bathe before, you know, the light's all gone. And just to be clean, to go to bed clean. I like to wash my hair, and just because I usually get sweaty during the day. So I find when I dunk, you know, this time of year the water's really cold, so I'm not always keen to actually get in and swim. You know, I'll wade into my waist and just sort of bathe while I'm standing. And I find when I dunk my head in the water, you know, you dug it in to get it wet, and then you dunk it in to rinse the soap out. I lose my balance sometimes. And if you don't want to fall in, it's just handy to have something to hang on to while you're doing that, right? For whatever reason, right? Also, just when you're getting in to bathe, you got bare feet. It's handy to have a third point of contact while you're negotiating the bottom of a riverbed, because there could be sharp rocks or, you know, things like that. It's just, you're just less likely, because you've got bare feet, you're less likely to injure your feet if you've got the walking stick. Also, just for getting down and getting up, like if you're hunting or snaring or whatever, and there's something on the ground you want to get, you've just got that extra assistance when you're getting down and up. Doesn't matter so much for a young, spry person, but you know, if you want to extend your outdoors activities into later life, then having just, you know, a means to squat down and get back up. You know, for some of us, the knees start to go, the lower back starts to go, the hips go, all these sorts of things, right? Just having that extra, so that's why old people have canes, right? So it helps. And over the course of a day, if you're doing all of that squatting and bending, and if you had an assistance with you, you're going to be a little less fatigued at the end of the day. So there's that. Number 4 is that it's an excellent lever. I mean, depending on the type of wood, It's got limits to how strong it can be, but you can use it for prying up rocks where you're looking for bait for fishing or for whatever, trying to move them around to make a fire pit or something like that. For moving logs, you want to get underneath a log. There's a log in your way, there's a log in the way of a trail, or, you're sawing something and it pinches up and you got to pry it off. There's all kinds of situations where it's just handy to have a reasonably strong pry bar handy, and that's what it is. It's a pry bar, so it's handy for that. Also, if you need to, you can use this sort of thing for rigging up a Spanish windlass. That's when you've got two trees and you've got a rope slung around the trees, doubled up, and you put the stick through the two ropes and you start twisting. If you need super, super, super tight line between two trees, you can't get much tighter than this. The Spanish windlass will keep going until it breaks the rope, or brings down the trees, or breaks the stick. It'll just keep. You can't get any tighter than that. So it's handy for all that. Great lever for any sort of mechanical type situation. Another useful thing is post, to use as a post or a rack. You can lean it against a tree and hang your backpack on it. You can hang your jacket on it, poncho, whatever. Because sometimes you don't want those things on the ground if it's really wet, or you're just somewhere where you got to take your back off, but maybe it's all bog. You got to, for whatever reason, you got to take that stuff off. You can't lay it on the ground because the ground's wet. Or you're somewhere where it's got a lot of ticks, and maybe you've got, like, usually during tick season, May, June, I'm usually wearing hip waders if I'm in the woods. So the hip waders do a great job of, depending on if you have the rubber kind. Okay, if you have the rubber kind, the ticks usually don't grab onto that and crawl up. But if you had to set down your backpack, you want to take off your jacket, or whatever the situation is, you don't want to lay that on the ground because the ticks will be drawn to it because it has your smell. So you just sling them over this and lean it against a tree. I mean, usually there's plenty of things on trees you can use to hang things off of, but if there isn't, you've got that option. Or you can just drive it into the ground and hang things on it. If there's no trees around, it gives you that option. Also, if you're on a trail and you're going to go off the trail just a little bit, sometimes if you want to be extra safe so that you can find your way back to the trail, this one doesn't have that situation, but if you attach a flag or anything to the stick, or if you painted the end a bright color, it can be used as a marker to get you back to the trail, just as a point of reference. Also, in camp, there are ways you can rig it up instead of rigging up a clothesline. If you find a crook in a tree, just the right sort of situation, you can have it slung horizontally, and it can be a clothes hanger. Wash your socks at the end of the day, wash your socks and underwear at the end of the day, and hang them to dry. Instead of having to rig up a clothesline, it can be easier just to stick this between two crooks and two trees, or there's various ways to cantilever it in, that sort of thing. Great clothes hanger. When you're on the trail, number 6 on the trail. When you're on the trail, it can be very useful for if you're going through an area with a lot of thorns, just for pushing those things out of the way. Same thing goes for spider webs and anything icky like that, especially useful when you got kids along. You can just sort of clear the spider webs, even if you're going through a trail, but it's a relatively narrow trail. Like if you're following a deer trail or something like that through the woods, you can get the spider webs out of the way. Nobody wants a face full of spider webs, or spiders for that matter. Also, if you're going through an area with a lot of wet brush or ferns, you can sort of just wave your stick around. It's not going to remove all the water from that stuff, but it's going to remove, like, 80% of the water from that stuff. And so your pants just won't get quite as soaked. You're still going to get wet pants, but maybe they're not soaking, wringing wet. So wet that they start dripping down into your boots, right? So it can prevent that. I think that's all for that. So handy on the trail for just moving things out of your way that you don't want in your way, whatever those things are. Another good point is just the added efficiency in walking when you're on the trail. When you're walking, what are you doing? Really, you're leaning forward until you lose your balance, and you're taking one foot off the ground and you're leaning forward until you start tipping forward, and then you're catching yourself with the other leg, and you're doing that over and over and over again, right? So you're basically walking is a process of losing and regaining your balance over and over and over again. And when you add uneven terrain to that mix, especially if you're a person who's used to walking, in our regular everyday lives, most of us are walking on flat ground with no obstacles. So, you know, if you are in the woods all the time, you get natural feel for, you know, just dealing with terrain. If you take a person, and I'm in the woods all the time, but if I take a person with me for a long hike through the actual woods, not on a trail, but like in the forest where you need a compass, you're going to see that person fall down a lot because they're just not used to compensating. And so even if you're used to doing all of that, you have to compensate a lot more when you don't have a walking stick, right? The walking stick just solves the balance problem, right? So your hips and your knees and your joints and your lower back, all of those parts of your body don't have to do as much work to maintain your balance going over uneven terrain. So the end result is if you're on it for 2 hour, 3 hour, 4 hour, 6 hour, however long the hike is, you're just going to be less fatigued at the end of the day because your body isn't working as hard to maintain its balance. It's also the case that you can probably move a little, I find I move a little faster when I'm walking with a walking stick. Part of that's just the confidence that I'm not going to fall down. Once you get into the rhythm of it, I mean, there's a way to walk with a walking stick. There's a sort of pattern to it where you put it out in front of you and you walk forward, then you put it out in front of you again. The walking stick always leads. And you get into a rhythm like that, you can actually move very fast, arguably with less energy being expended. So you get where you want to go faster and you're fresher when you get there. It's just really great for that. Number 8, fire. Your walking stick is great for when you've got a fire going, just adjusting the fire, moving things in the fire, adjusting logs to get a proper burn. Or if you want to cook, maybe you want to gather the coals up and put them underneath your pot to concentrate the heat, all that sort of stuff. And it never ceases to amaze me when you watch a novice with a fire and they're always trying, whatever they're trying to cook or whatever they're adapting, they're trying to move the thing they're cooking to where the heat is in the fire. But if you've got a good fire going, you know what you're doing, you move the fire to your thing. You hang a pot, you gather the coals up underneath the pot, get that pot boiling. So it's handy for that. Also, if you have a notch like this at the end, right, it can be used. I mean, you should always have a pot like this. This isn't the best for carrying in a backpack, but you can just strap it on the outside. Also, you can put stuff in it. But anyway, pot with a lid. Right, you can just, it's handy for lifting the pot off the fire if you've got some sort of rack or something like that, a grill, right? You're just cooking things over a grill. But often you don't have that sort of thing. You can actually use something like this to suspend the pot over the fire. And you just do that by having something that goes underneath it here so it's tipped up, right? And you just have something heavy holding down the end, like a log or a rock or whatever. Or even you can drive it into the ground if the ground's soft enough. But you just have this tipped up over the fire. And if you're controlling the fire, then someone's going to say, well, won't your walking stick catch on fire? No. I mean, if you're putting it into an inferno, yes, but you're controlling the fire. You're moving the fire sort of to this side of things and you're gathering it up underneath the pot. This is all about learning how to control fires and making the fire work for you, right? Fire is a great friend, but a terrible enemy, right? So you control the fire. So great for lifting the pot off the fire. If your pot has a bail, right? And any pot you take in the woods should have a bail, in my opinion anyway. I never use this when it's off the fire for pouring, but use this to get it off the fire. Okay, and finally, when you're extinguishing your fire, you can use your walking stick to stir the coals. You dump the water and you stir the coals, get the fire out. There's one more point about why you don't want some beautiful piece of woodcraft to be your walking stick. You just want, to me, it's like find a skinny dead spruce tree and smooth it out, that sort of thing. You do want it to be smooth, relatively smooth, so you can adjust your, like if you're walking along and there's some branch in the way, you can just do this. You don't want to be getting splinters and that sort of thing, right? That's the thing I find myself often doing. Usually when I'm bashing stuff, I'm using the heavy end because it's more like a club, right? So I tend to go like this. So you want it reasonably smooth, but if you look at this, it's far from perfect, right? You can see the knots, right? It's just good enough, right? You get it good enough. Because if it's not precious to you, you'll use it to stir a fire. You'll use it to adjust a fire. You'll use it to suspend a pot if it's all lacquered and varnished and that sort of thing, you're not going to use it to suspend the pot over fire because it's going to catch on fire, right? So you don't want to do that. Number 9, in camp. I mean, I've already mentioned a number of things where it's useful in camp, but another thing is just it can be used as a third leg for a tripod if you're just trying, you know, like sometimes, you know, it sounds like something you wouldn't have trouble doing, but sometimes you can't find 3 straight sticks for a tripod, you know, to cook something over. There's another way to do it. You make a tripod and you suspend the pot over a fire, right? So this is the third leg of the tripod. Okay, so there's that. Also, this can be used to suspend a tarp for whatever reason. You know, you're setting up a tarp to eat under or sleep under or whatever. It's not high enough, in my opinion, to set up a ideal tarp situation. But if you were in a tight spot where you just want to, you know, you want to crawl under something to get out of the rain, you can use this in a pinch. You know, if you'd be running around looking for some sort of long post. So it's handy in camp like that. And as well as the other things I mentioned about, you know, clothes hanger and that sort of thing, and using it with your fire. Number 10 is, I find it useful for hunting and trapping. I mean, I'm not a trapper, but I snare rabbits in the winter. Just a few for a little feed. But for hunting, this becomes a fairly useful, you know, gun rest. Right? You can just set your gun out, and this way, at least there's no up and down, right? You've steadied it on that dimension. You got to do the work to suspend it this way, to deal with it this way. But, you know, if you're walking along and you see something, instead of having to move, you know, like if you need to make an accurate shot, and there's a bit of distance involved, you want a rest of some kind. You don't want to move any more than you have to. If you're deer hunting or something like that, I mean, you can find a tree, but you have to move to the tree. The deer might see you, right? So if you can just bring it up and get it on that rest, it gives you that advantage for stability when you're shooting. I mean, some people might say that, you know, having a walking stick, in addition to a rifle or a shotgun or a .22, is a liability. I don't know. I find it's kind of 6 of one and a half dozen of the other. I tend to take it with me, but not always. It really depends on my mood, I guess. Certainly for checking snares, I always have a walking stick. Because, again, you're doing a lot of hiking, and you're not really trying to be quiet. You're just trying to get it done. So it's handy for that, but it's also handy when you're checking snares to dispatch game. It's good for catching things like frogs, or even if you want to hold down a snake. Where I live, you never need to do that. We just have garter snakes. You just leave them alone. But if you were in a situation where there was snakes, it would be handy for just hitting the snake or whatever your situation is with your snake. A stick is a great, even for checking for snakes, right? If you're walking along and you're going through a spot, I mean, we don't have venomous snakes here, but just having your stick to poke in, that sort of thing, to look for rattlesnakes or whatever, that's a much safer way than using your foot, right? Also the case when you're hunting like a deer or something like that, if you've shot it, deer with antlers in particular, and you want to check to see if it's still alive. I mean, I remember in a hunting course I took, where I live, you have to take a hunting course to be allowed to hunt. They said to just poke the eye with the barrel of your gun. You have to get awfully close. I mean, especially most people use carbines. Nobody uses like very few people use long rifles, really long ones. So you have to get awfully close to a deer to poke it in the eye with most guns. And if it's got antlers and it gets up and it's got explosive energy, I mean, deer are stronger than you. A full-grown, mature male deer is stronger than, you know, they're super strong, and they know how to fight, right? They got sharp antlers. They've been fighting. They know what they're doing, and they're going to, you know, get you off of them if they're still alive. And it's amazing how much energy and strength shot deer can have because they get all this adrenaline, right? So, yeah, for me, I'd rather be back with my stick. So I'm like, you know, 7 feet away, sort of thing, right? The length of my arm plus the length of my stick. I'm a good 7 feet away. Give it a poke like that. Maybe that's a better way to do it. Finally, as I said before, you know, when you're hunting, it's a pain to have a walking stick because it limits the way you can carry the gun. I mean, you can use a cradle carry, right? Or you can just have it hooked over your arm. You can use a trail carry where you're just sort of holding the gun like this, you know, at your side. or you can have it slung, okay? But you don't have as many options for holding the gun. And of course, you don't have quite the same capacity to react to what you're seeing. That is to say, you've got your walking stick and you're carrying a gun. Let's say I'm just carrying the gun with a trail carry, and I got my walking stick. Now I see something I want to shoot. Put it up like this, take off the safety and shoot. But that's different than walking through the woods like this, right? When you see something there is a bit of a delay, but that's more about training yourself to get the gun up on the stick. There's really not that much of a delay, but you are limited in the ways you can carry the gun. But I think certainly for deer and things like that, the capacity of the walking stick to help you walk silently makes up for any inconvenience it adds. Also, it's the case when you're walking and carrying a gun, it's not like the whole time you're, ready for something. When you're hunting, there's areas you are where you think it's really, really likely you're going to see a deer, and that's when you take it off the sling. And when you're just going from one place to another and you think there's really low chance of seeing a deer, use your sling, because it's just easier to carry a gun with a sling, right? So I just don't see it as being a liability. And the ability of a walking stick to help you move silently through the woods. I mean, if you set your foot down and you feel a twig under your foot, you can just take the foot off, right? Because you've already got this. And this never makes a sound when it goes in the ground. The ability to stay silent when you're hunting gives you a huge advantage, right? So whatever liability you think it has, by using up one of your hands, it's really not a problem because you can use it as a gun rest and it helps you move quietly. Okay, number 11 is a survival kit. So I haven't done that with this stick here, but you can, if you want, you can wrap cordage around it so you've got spare cordage. You can even have something high visibility like, some orange or, blaze orange paracord, which turns the walking stick into a kind of marker, right? So you don't lose it. It's always good to have extra cordage of various types. You can also wrap duct tape or electrical type tape around it so that you've got, a good length of that for whatever you might need it to repair something, or even in a pinch use like a bandage. You can also, I wouldn't do it up here, but maybe midway down the stick, you could have a small bag, waterproof bag, where you've got a handful of things in that bag. Fishing line, fishing hook, safety pin, maybe a couple Band-Aids, whatever, right? Maybe a little bit of wax paper or some other thing that catches fire easily, maybe a pack of matches, or maybe even a ferro rod, whatever, right? Maybe even a tiny little knife, right? But, that's all a question of your imagination. I never do that. I've always got stuff on me. I just don't see the point. And I want my walking stick as disposable as possible, sort of thing. So I can use it hard. If there's a branch, I can just hit it as hard as I want, and I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. So I tend to like them pretty simple. But you can do that. And finally, number 12, and I left this last because it's really the least likely thing. And I think whenever people talk this way, I think they sound a bit crazy. But maybe that's just where I live because it's so safe here. I don't know. But self-defense. I'm not talking about defending yourself against animals. Any animal that wants to kill you and eat you, you're not going to fend it off with this, right? At least where I live. We got two things, bears and sort of extra large coyotes, larger than a typical coyote, and they have killed people here in the past. It's very, very rare. They're afraid of people and they run away when they see you, but it could happen, right? They could be starving and they're desperate and they think you're vulnerable in whatever way. If they attack you, they're going to attack you in a group, because our coyotes actually pack up in the winter, and they often, if you see their tracks, they often hunt in pairs at the very least. So they're kind of unique coyotes here. But if they attack you, there's going to be more than one of them, and they know what they're doing, right? You don't know what you're doing. I mean, you think of a predatory animal that's large enough to kill a human being. That is more like a serial killer, if you want to understand this. I mean, it's the thing that kills things all the time, and it's really good at it. And by the way, it's faster than you. It's got it's got better speed, timing, and reflexes than an Olympic athlete, right? It's got and it's 4-footed. It's got 4 feet. I mean, having 4, we humans give up, there's advantages to being bipedal, because you can carry things and use your hands more, but there are huge advantages to having 4 feet. Just watch a lion or a panther or something watch it. And there's all kinds of videos you see them attack things. I mean, the advantage, I mean, for a clawed animal, that's like 4 weapons, right? The stability it has, just its ability to not get knocked off balance. So suffice it to say, the walking stick as a defense for defending yourself against, I mean, it's good for snakes, because snakes haven't got a lot of options, but for, you know, a mountain lion or a bear or a pack of wolves or whatever, or coyotes or whatever, large ones anyway, you're probably not going to see it coming, you know, and you're probably really not gonna, it's not gonna make much of a difference. You know, I could see if you're in a camp and there's like something going around the camp and you don't know what it is, I could see lashing a knife onto your walking stick to make it into a spear. Then you got something, right? Because then you can attack it when it can't reach, you know, it's attacking you with its face and its hands and you're attacking it with a distance, right? So you can get in a couple good shots before it gets you, maybe hold it off. But when you're walking on a trail, that's not an option. You're not going to run into anything that's going to give you enough time to properly lash a knife on so well that it can be a spear. Right? Anything you run into on a trail that wants to attack you, you're probably not going to see it coming. And if you do see it coming, it's because it's so, it sees you as so little of a threat. It's just, you're probably not going to be able to contend with a 300-pound black bear or a grizzly bear or whatever. It's just not a defense. It's a useful defense against people. You know, if I was put in a Roman Colosseum and I had to choose, a staff or a knife, I'd rather have a staff. Even a staff or sword, I'd rather have the staff. Yeah, it can be useful for defending yourself against other people. I've never ever needed to do that in the woods, but also, like, so many times. On these outdoors channels, these guys talk about self-defense, and I mean, it's only useful if you know how to use it. Like, right? Do you know how to fight with a stick? Like, all I know how to do is you shove it like this, and then you hit. And if that stuns the person enough, you can hit them again and just keep hitting them until, you know, the situation's resolved, right? But I really don't know how to defend I've never taken martial arts classes where we use staves and that sort of thing. So, you know, the fact that you've got a knife or a big, long, hard stick or whatever you've got, do you know how to use it? Do you actually know how to use it? Have you practiced using it? Do you have any idea what you're doing? You know, it's a bit, to me, all these things are ludicrous, but it's still worth mentioning because it can, you know, it's also the case that, I mean, the person you're pitted against, maybe they have superior knowledge of that sort of thing. Right? Maybe you do a quick thrust like this to get them off, and they just deftly, you know, slip it off to the side, grab it, pull it out of your hands, and they beat the tar out of you with it, right? So, you know, they might just have much more experience with that. Maybe they have combat experience or whatever. You're going to be so out of your league with a person like that. Or even if the person has no experience at all, they just might be more athletic than you, just naturally gifted. They've got reflexes, right? They've got those Roy Jones, Muhammad Ali reflexes that you can't train that. So even if they've never been in a fight in their life, they have that ability to react and counter and do all that sort of stuff. Chances are, you know, that person's going to, the stick you're using is going to end up in that person's hands, and it's become a weapon for them. So, you know, always better to just not resort to the weapon and just avoid the situation altogether if you can, or calm things down, or de-escalate, whatever. Give the person whatever they want, you know, that sort of thing. But, you know, chances are, unless you're living in a very dangerous place, it's just not a situation you're going to be in. So yes, self-defense, but I think that's it's never the case. I mean, if you're the kind of person that's, I guess, scared and worried a lot, having a big stick in your hands can maybe make you feel safer, I suppose. It gives you a sense of security. Same thing with carrying a knife or carrying a really big knife. You can give you this sense of security that the thing can save you. But only if you know how to use it, right? Oh, one more thing I forgot to mention is you can use a walking stick if you've got a notch like this in the end. When you're trying to get water out of a river or a creek or that sort of thing, it's not always the case that it's easy to access the water. There could be a bank. And it never ceases to amaze me. People can see a bank like that, and they get down on their hands and knees, and they reach down into the water to fill their pot up with water. And, you know, That's the situation where you fall in. Or you get ticks all over you because you're kneeling down, and usually on a bank of a river, there's always lots of ticks because there's grasses there, right? Not always, but often. So you don't want to be doing that if you can avoid it. But more importantly, you don't want to fall in, right? Especially what if the side of the river is muddy and that sort of thing, right? You don't want to be getting down on your hands and knees in mud. And what if it's, something where you can sink in, that sort of thing. If you've got a notch on the end of your stick, you can use it to get the pot in the water and fill the pot up without you falling in or getting wet or whatever, right? Sometimes that's just, the way it is. Wherever you're camping, that might be a steep bank. Where I'm right now is like that. There's a river right over there, and the bank is about 4 feet higher than the water. So you really can't use, you could hang onto a tree, I guess, and reach down and fill your pot up, but it's so much easier to do this, or even better is to just attach some cordage to this and just throw the pot in the water, bring it back. But let's say you're just hiking for the day and you didn't have any of that sort of gear for whatever reason. This is another good way to get the pot in and out of the water without you falling in. So anyway, that's all the things I can think of. If there's anything else I missed, please put it in the comments. I'd be curious to see what I missed. I'm sure I missed something. But otherwise, I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. Until next time, enjoy the outdoors on the cheap. Thanks for watching.